Hi, and welcome to Digital Background Painting Workflow. In this class, I'm going to go over one example of a digital painting process step by step. This will be a helpful class if this is your first time trying to paint anything on a computer and you aren't sure where to start. The materials you'll need to get started are a computer with a drawing program, I'm using Photoshop for this class, a mouse, and a tablet with some kind of pen input. I'm using the Wacom Cintiq, a professional-grade drawing tablet that you can use at the library in Studio 300. We also have Wacom One tablets that you can check out and use at home. The first step for your painting is to find reference photos to start off with. For references for this project, I'm using Pexels, a stock photo site. I really like it because there's a lot of high-quality photographs that you can use as inspiration for your next painting. Once I find a photo I like, I click on it and then save it. If you have a Pexels account that you can make for free, you can save all of your reference photos to these different collections. So I've made a collection for the digital background that I want to create, and these are just some examples of the photos that I have saved. I was kind of on a sailing and ship sort of theme, so I was saving a lot of photos about the ocean. I like this one with the lighthouse in the background. You can take your time collecting photos. You are really collecting them not to copy exactly, but just as inspiration. I liked the sort of island in the background here. I know that I wanted my painting to have some seagulls and bird detailing, so I put this photo here as a reminder. This is as far as you need to go in terms of collecting references. You can save them to your computer. I like having them in this little Pexels board so that they're all in one place and I can see them easily. Another tool I like to use, but it's optional, is a application called PureRef. Once you download PureRef, you can put all of your reference photos into a little gray window, and it lets you zoom in and out of them really easily. You can also click and drag the photos to your Photoshop document and type in notes so that you can remember why you saved certain reference photos. So I've taken the reference photos and put them in this PureRef window on my computer, and I'm looking at this as I go back and forth to my painting. So I have the Cintiq tablet on one side, and I have a computer with my reference photos on the other side. If I want to zoom into a picture, I can double-click on it and then look at the photo up close for any details I want to include in the painting. So for the next step, we're going to move on to creating a new document in Photoshop. Once you have all your references collected, you're going to want to open up Photoshop, and you should see a window that looks something like this. You're going to choose a size for your document to be. You want to give yourself enough room to be able to zoom in and be able to work on details. What I like to do is go to the Art and Illustration tab and usually make something that's about poster size. This is 18 by 24 inches, and it's 300 pixels per inch, which is a decent amount of detail for what we're going to be doing. You can always up those to 600 or larger if you're really wanting to have a large document, but this will be good for what we're working on. I'm also going to change the orientation to landscape right here. And this is really important. You want to make sure the artboards checkbox is checked. This is going to allow you to work on your document, but also have reference pictures and thumbnails next to whatever you're working on, which will be important for later steps. Also, the artboards feature only works in the RGB color mode, so that'll be set to RGB. I like to set it to 16-bit color, and I also like to set the background to something that isn't pure white. You can do a light gray, you can do a different color, but this just makes it a little easier on the eyes when you're drawing, and you can always change this later. And I'm also going to change the color profile to Adobe RGB 1998. That's just a setting that I like. Once you hit create, it should open up this new window with your artboard. You can see in the layers panel that there is an artboard grouping with a layer underneath it. You can always group these together. You can also create additional artboards. This is nice for the thumbnailing step. So your artboard tool is hidden beneath the move tool. You can hit V on your keyboard to get to here, but once you hit artboard, you can draw a new artboard that you can make copies of or draw thumbnails on. You can see another layer has been added to the layer tab, and I'm just going to click on the brush tool to show you that if I hit artboard 2 and create another layer, now I'm able to draw on here and take notes or make a thumbnail sketch next to my final drawing. You can also import reference photos by going back wherever you have your references saved and hitting copy and then hitting paste. I'm going to do this on the other computer screen. So I've gone ahead and clicked Control Copy. Now if I hit Control Paste, a window should come up. If I hit OK, there I have my reference photo. I can make it larger or smaller by clicking on the Move tool. I can move my reference photo over to the side, have the Move tool, hit Command T to bring up the Transform tool, and if I square this up, now I have my reference photo right here. You can add as many as you want, but I am going to keep it to about 3 so that I don't make this file size too big. But we're going to move on over to my other document where I have added in these reference pictures, the ones that I was using the most to make my line drawing, and added in some thumbnail sketches. Which brings us to the next step, which is thumbnailing for your final sketch. But you can see that the thumbnails don't have to be super detailed. You're just using them to get an idea of how you want your composition to look. While I'm doing this, I am looking at my reference photos over here, along with the other reference photos I have on my other computer. And I am just blocking in really basic shapes and lines. This is super messy. I did not like this first one. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's okay if it's super messy. For my second thumbnail, I was playing around with where I wanted to put this lighthouse, maybe a little house. I knew I wanted mountains in the background. While you're doing thumbnails, you want to think in terms of background, middle ground, and then foreground. Foreground is what's closest to you. Middle ground is the middle. Background is what's furthest away from you. Eventually, I made it down to making this very basic thumbnail with a lighthouse and mountains in the background, this sort of cliff in the middle ground. I made the shapes in the foreground a lot darker. I also used the gradient tool to just create a sky in the background. It's okay if your thumbnail is all just grays at this point. It makes it a little easier to put together points of interest, put together what objects you want in your thumbnail. For this next step, what we're going to do is create a thumbnail and make a color script or like a colored thumbnail for us to use with the final drawing. So to illustrate a little bit what I'm talking about before we get started making our own color script for this piece, I went ahead and searched color scripts in my Google image search, and it gives you a lot of examples that different people have made. Sometimes you can find examples from movies that have been released. So I have some pulled up here. This was just one that I thought was interesting that illustrated the concept. You can see that these are really simple, small drawings, and it's really focusing on the shapes of things and color more than lighting and shadow or detail. You don't have to get too complicated with it. You just want to use different colors to differentiate what objects are in the foreground, the middle ground, the background. I also pulled up this example of a color script from the movie Up. Again, they're just sticking to really blocky, simple shapes and using color and a little bit of texture to differentiate what's going on. Last example, similar thing. These are very rough, blocky shapes. Looks like they've been done with pastel. All of these are from the movie Cars. But like I said before, they're using shapes to do the negative space, to do the characters. There's some focus on lighting a little bit, but it's really still focused on color and rough shapes. So we're going to do a similar thing by making another thumbnail under here. First thing we're going to do is create a new artboard. And what I'm going to do is actually duplicate this group here because I already have my line drawing on it, and I'm going to right click, hit duplicate artboard, and move this down out of the way. And in this layer copy, I'm just going to delete the gray tones. So now I have the thumbnail I originally drew, and we can work on the colors. We're going to pull colors from some of the reference photos that I have over here. And there was another reference photo on the other screen that I liked, so I'm going to bring that in here as well. So I actually really liked the overall color palette in this picture. I liked the blues and greens. I also liked some of the colors and clouds in this top picture right here. So I'm going to actually move this down where it's easier. Where it's easier to see everything together. Now we're ready to start working. So to start with, what I'm going to do is make sure that I have my brush tool selected, and then I'm going to hold down the Option key on my keyboard. If you're using a Windows, you can hold down Alt, and this eyedropper tool will show up, so you can select colors from any part of your reference photo. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about layer organization for your thumbnail. So ideally, I drew all of my lines on one layer, but it's actually a little bit better to draw different parts of your thumbnail, like the mountains, the lighthouse, the sky, have those lines on different layers. But for the thumbnail, it's not so important. It'll be more important as we get into the final line drawing. But I'm going to rename this group Thumbnail 4. And keep all of the layers for this thumbnail, all the colors I use in this group. So if I open and close it, it all stays in one place and it stays organized. So what I'll do here is make a new layer, make sure it's underneath my line drawing, and I'm going to start furthest back and move forward to the front. So for the sky, I really liked this color, so I'm going to hold down Option, like I said before, make my brush a little bit bigger, and just use that to paint in the background. I actually don't like this brush texture. I'm going to make this a little bit, change this just a little bit. That looks a lot better. You can also use the gradient tool if you have two colors selected right here. Instead of painting the background in, you can choose the gradient tool and use that to create a little bit more of a textured sky. I'm going to actually switch these colors around. So I'm actually going to use the color picker to change the colors of my gradient. For this foreground color, I like the one that I originally chose from here, but for the background color, I think I'm going to actually pick this green one, or lighter green one. We're going to go ahead and draw that gradient again. Yeah, so I kind of like how this sky is looking. We're going to keep using the layers to paint over the rest of the thumbnail. So you don't have to rush this process. You can take your time doing it. Next, I'm going to put in some of these mountains. Once again, holding down Option to get some colors that I like. It doesn't have to be perfect. This part of the process can be pretty messy. We're just focusing on colors and shapes. And then for this foreground kind of mountain cliff area, I really liked the sort of green mossy mountain that was in this picture. So I'm going to go ahead and paint that in. I think now would actually be a better time to switch brushes. For the kind of moss on the top, I'm going to switch to a dry brush. Something with a little bit of texture in it. Kind of like this charcoal one or this pastel one, and use a larger brush. So like I said before, you kind of want things to get darker as they come to the front. And now that I have these other colors that I wanted on the page, I'm realizing this sky layer was a little too dark. So we're going to lower the opacity on that a little bit. And I'm going to go ahead and pick a much darker color for the shoreline in the front. That's just a quick example of putting together a color script. Oh, forgot to do the water. Need to make a middle layer down here to put the water in. So we're going to go ahead and pick out some of these colors. And I'm going to go back to using a softer brush. This wet blender one looks all right. I actually switched over to an oil brush because that seems to be working a little bit better. And then I'm going to make a separate layer for this lighthouse. I really liked the lighthouse in this picture, so I'm going to use similar colors, maybe make it a little bit lighter. Yeah, that's a little dark. I actually kind of like the sky color back here. So this looks really rough, but it gets the idea across. We're just doing this to give ourselves an idea of what colors we want to use for the final piece when we're painting. So with that, we're going to move on to the upper part of this canvas. Where I've already made more detailed line art for my painting. So here I have the line art in its own grouped folder that you can see. The canvas is its own background layer. And I have things like the mountains on its own layer. If I toggle these, eye icons on and off, you can see that each object is sort of on its own layer. It just makes it easier to work with as we go through the process. But I still have to organize these a little bit more because I want, when I'm painting, things in the foreground to be in their own group and things that are in the middle ground and the background to be in their own group. I also need to make another layer for the sky. So we're going to, right above this mountains layer, have one that's called sky. Also, it's good to name your main layers so you don't get lost when you're painting. You don't have to make, because you'll make more layers as you go ahead and paint more, but you don't have to name every single layer, just the ones that are like the main elements. So that's what I've done here. And we're going to go ahead and create another group that's in our line art folder. We're going to name this one BG for background. And the sky and the mountains are going to be in here. I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing for the middle ground and the foreground. Alright, so I've cleaned up my workspace a little bit, moved my thumbnail up at the top so I can see where I'm working, see what colors I need, and I also put the two references that I'm going to use the most next to my final drawing. So we're going to start by laying in just some flat colors. We're not worried about light or shadow at this point, just going to fill the whole page with flat colors depending on what part we're working on. So I'm going to go back to this folder where it says background, and we're going to start with the sky, making sure to keep colors lighter as they're further away from us and darker as they go back. So I'm going to go ahead and pick out a lighter color from my thumbnail. First, making sure that I am on my brush tool. Yeah, and keeping this a lighter color. And I'm going to select around the sky area so that I can fill that in using the lasso tool. It doesn't have to be super exact at this point because we're just working on the background. But I've gone ahead and made this selection, and you can use your fill tool, which is under the gradient tool. It's also called the paint bucket tool, to fill in that sky. Actually, I forgot a step. I wanted to make a new layer for just the color first and put it underneath my line art. I'm going to rename that sky flat. And now I'm going to go ahead and fill that in. So as of right now, that's all I need. And we're going to hit Command D to get rid of that selection. And I actually have these background layers in the wrong order. So I'm going to move my background folder. I'm going to move my background folder down. Move my foreground folder up. That's actually the order that I want things in, so I can still see my layers. And these mountains are going to be in front of the sky, so we're going to move that forward. So this is what you should end up with for your first layer. And we're just going to keep using the same tools to fill the rest of the color in. If you hit this lasso tool, I can go ahead and use my pen to draw any kind of shape I want. But let's say I wanted to go from a curving, more organic shape to doing a building or doing straight lines. Then you can hold down, while I'm drawing with my lasso tool, I can hold down Option or Alt and create straight lines with my selection. Let's see if I can do a little bit better of an example. So you can make pretty much any shape you want using just the lasso tool. So I'm going to go ahead and use that tool to outline the mountain shapes by zooming in a little bit. Creating another layer. These are going to be mountain. Flat. And we'll go ahead and use the lasso tool to create the background. It's okay if this process takes you a little bit of time. You want to take your time choosing your colors. So that's kind of the idea you're going for. I'm going to go ahead and fill in the rest of the picture with flats. So this is close to what you should get when you're done putting the flat colors in. Now we're going to move on to details. For these final steps, I'm going to show you how to make some detail passes. I'm not going to do the entire painting, but I'm going to zoom in on one area to just show you a couple techniques you can use. So we'll start here. I'm going to start with painting in the details of this lighthouse. I'm looking at a reference photo while I do this, but here's some ways you can get started. You want to make sure you have your lighthouse flat layer selected. We're going to make a new layer above it. This empty layer, we're then going to clip to the flat layer. This allows you to color in just where this white lighthouse is, and you don't have to worry about selecting the lighthouse again or coloring outside the lines. You're going to do this with every single flat layer eventually, but what you do to clip it is hold down your Alt key or your Option key on your keyboard, and then if you hover between the two layers that you want to clip, this little clipping icon appears. So when you have that, click on the space between the two layers, and then you'll see that layer 9 here is clipped to your flat layer, the layer below it. You can also add additional layers on top of this clipping layer. They will all clip to the lighthouse one, but we're going to just start with the one. I'm going to use it to color in the roof of the lighthouse. So I have this red color selected. My brush tool is selected. I'm just going to paint in right here. And even though I'm coloring outside this line, I'm not actually coloring outside of the shape that I have it clipped to. I'm going to make another layer. Go ahead and hold down the Option key and clip that layer. And if I choose another color, we're going to go ahead and choose maybe like a blue one. Gonna go ahead and paint that in. For things like windows, you can also use the gradient tool. Change this to a darker color. So I have my color selected. I'm just going to make a small selection in here, and then go back to my gradient tool and just select those windows. What's nice about this technique is you can add shadows or add just a little bit of dimension into the layer that you have clipped. We're going to go ahead and clip this new layer. And work on just the tower part of the lighthouse. I'm also going to use this smudge tool. Making it pretty soft. And use it to sort of blur these lines. Make a smoother transition with my painting. So that can also help. Another good technique is to use a texture brush to create some texture on the actual tower. We'd go back to brushes. There's plenty of texture brushes that you can find off the internet, but I'm going to go ahead and just use this spatter brush to create a little bit of texture. And those seem like kind of big splatters to me, so I'm going to go ahead and make this brush just a little bit smaller. And that adds a little bit of like a stone texture onto my lighthouse. The last bit I'm going to do is actually erase some of the space in this upper balcony part, because we can actually see through the grating. So if I go back to my flat layer and choose my eraser tool and just erase a little bit there. And I'm going to zoom in to just put some highlights where that grate is. So if I go ahead, choose my brush tool again, go back to my dry media brush. I'm just going to use like a small pencil brush. Maybe make it a bit smaller. Use a kind of light gray just to highlight some of the grates. I'm actually going to do this on top of my lighthouse layer so it can be seen a little bit. Now if I zoom back out, that lighthouse has some details added. It looks a lot more interesting. So those are the techniques I wanted to show you in this class. So you would systematically go through each of the layers, adding details, especially for the layers that were closest to the viewer in the foreground. And then things would get foggier, hazier as you go into the back. But hopefully you gained something by watching this class and learned some techniques that would be useful to experiment with. Feel free to check out the Cintiq tablet while you're in the studio. This is a great tool to practice doing digital painting on. But thank you so much for watching, and hope to see you next time.